Alrighty, so.
I watched Dora the Explorer.
Really?
No, I'm not that young. But thank you for believing me.
Alrighty, so these are the files that we will work with. There are a couple of things that are twice here. For instance,
they shouldn't be
the
there.
asparagus.
No. I wanted to delete them, but they didn't. Apparently, they didn't delete from the stick. I told them on their accent, you can delete them.
So no asparagus.
No asparagus. I was just formatting my Instagram post. That's embarrassing.
Alright, so we can delete the asparagus. And
No, I'm sweating.
Yeah, you can delete this one.
No, yes, just that one.
Please delete the turban one.
I think the German one's better.
No.
I think the turban is kind of like a break of the style. It doesn't really fit
Okay,
it.
next time I'll just hire that.
I'm gonna play the recess part.
So we will not use the 001B. So that's
Oh,
gone.
You didn't be. You had one job, guy.
But the rest, I think, seems about right. Okay, now our challenge is to go from the beginning, and we have to think about how we get from this to this one.
Oh!
Well, that's just a perfect transition, I guess.
I don't see the difference.
That is so shallow. Even though the first hands are a bit too high up, like they're going almost out of your neck.
I will judge by
Yeah, also, I wanna see you do that position in real life.
Okay.
That's more realistic. Right? Wings on my penis by the Antwort, obviously. That's a song.
Do we have an idea of how we could possibly get from a flying
We animate the
Thing?
the wings and they fly away, and then the next one fades in.
fade out, fade in.
no fade out, fade in is
around the head.
Maybe the tip of the penis just pops and then. Shut up, I'm curious.
That's how it happens.
I was waiting for that one.
I don't go there.
I didn't want to say it. I wanted to.
But the penis can burn and this can.
Well, he just looks chunky. I just want to grab his cheeks.
You can put this one later on.
no, I want to get this to work.
Or you can work with the second and third one.
All right, do we have any elements that we could use, or could we use a functionality of having this somehow become this one?
Outlines.
Maybe the glass balls. Maybe the glasses though, because that's like the only shape that kind of fits.
Which one?
The glasses from the guy.
Hmm. But then we put a dick on his face. I'm not sure if we really want that.
Yeah, we want that.
This is a fiction character which you don't know who it is.
Well, if it's a fictional character we don't know who it is, why don't we put the penis onto a shirt?
Or maybe in one hand.
Yeah,
Or what if we make the transition a little bit more indirect?
No, but yeah, like, what if you put it on a shirt as if it was a logo and then it disappears? You know, like as if his shirt.
Nah, that's too easy. What if we start out, well, obviously with a penis, and because it's a penis, usually things come out of it, especially if it's in that
This
state.
is so much better.
And we could have the fireballs shoot out, and then they can fly around, and they can come to their place, and then he can sort of come from below, and then he holds
Like
the fireballs.
Yes, I'm
Sounds good?
Yeah, sounds amazing.
Or like the pieces should be flying, juggling, and then they turn into fireballs. Would be easy. Why go for it?
But then we would have to think about how we could ignite the fire. And with the source that we have, that could be a little bit challenging.
It just sounds like an act of sex disease. The penis is on fire and it's just throwing shit.
Is your penis burning? Oh, what happened?
Alrighty, so we have to think about a couple of things. First, do we need to do something special with this one here? I'm not sure. I don't think we have to prepare it that much. The only thing that I would do, it's ready to go. The only thing that I would want this to do in terms of the animation is get the feeling of the flame going out. So I would like to have it. Is this too dirty? How we can see how it goes along the shaft inside.
Sorry.
Sort of like a pumping thing. But this is something we don't have to prepare. This is something we will just do directly in After Effects. Here, however, we do have to prepare a couple of things. Thing number one, I want the fire to be nice. And I want it to be animated. In order for this to work properly, I would need to have this separated in 3 layers. To keep things simple, we will just prepare together in Photoshop with one fire thing, and then we just use the same fire in After Effects as all 4 of them.
Can we just cut it in After Effects?
No, because I want these 3 layers in After Effects, it's really hard to fill them.
Oh, you want to like cut the whole frame into parts?
Yes,
I thought you just
in the 3 different colors.
Wait,
okay,
so is
okay,
it
okay.
only you doing it because we don't have all the files?
Do you want the
No, you have all the files.
No.
No.
Yeah, there are sticks going around.
Oh shit, you're supposed to copy. Oh
Are you a hoarder?
yes. Oh. Please have that.
Alrighty. I will do the first steps first. Afterwards, we will do them together. So, I will open up this file in Photoshop. And probably this was built in Illustrator, so there we would have the original layers and it would have been a little bit easier. But it's still interesting to see how we can adapt things even if they are not well prepared for us. So this helps us learn to be a little bit on our feet with things. So, don't need that and don't need this. Okay. So, it is the image number 13 that I will open up. Where's my folder? There we go. And I want to have this on a separate layer first. What is the best way of cropping this out and having as its own separate layer? The flame?
Select copy paste.
There's an even better way. There's a shortcut that does specifically this. Command J just duplicates it. So if I were to select this and I hit Command J, I still have it underneath it. So the original layer still has it, and I would need to delete it. But Command J, with an addition, does what we want. So I could select this, and I can hit Command Shift J, because this will duplicate and cut it out of the previous layer. Also, one thing that I always forget to set in my After Effects, in my Photoshop, but I really enjoy doing, I don't really like how these layers are shown. By default in Photoshop, in the tiny preview, it shows me the content in the size of the entire document, which is really hard. If I later have 5 layers, I can hardly see which layer does which. So what I want to do is I want to go to the burger menu, and I go to the panel options, and here, for one, I could tell every panel to be shown larger, and I can say that it should be cropped based on the layer bounds. If I now say OK, I can see a lot clearer which layer does. All right, so now I have the flame. Then I want it to be separated. I want just the white part and nothing else. So for this, I could just hit W, make a quick selection of this, and I will duplicate it. Then I need to get rid of this on the original. So I select it again. But if I now fill this, or the content to where fill, this might not work well because the edge is just too close. Do you know how you can extend in a selection? Select, modify, and then we can expand. So here I can expand it by 2 pixels. It's a very large image, so let's go larger. Let's go by 5 more, that should be fine. And then see what the content aware fill does. And this worked pretty well. I see how the gradient worked out nicely. Then I will make another quick selection. This kind of worked not too well, so I do have to make some more manual adjustments here. But we're getting there. Yeah. I will not be too picky about this. I'm not quite sure why the thing doesn't select it the way that I want it, but so far so good. Or what would be another alternative to selecting it with a quick selection that might be a little bit more accurate? Yeah, maybe when I ask a question, you should at least look up here so you can pretend to think about it. The question is, if I use the quick selection and it doesn't give me results that are proper enough, in this specific scenario, what could be an alternative to create a more accurate selection of the inner part of the flame? No one has said anything, so select by color is a good option. So, where do we find that?
Go to select. We go, color range. Color range.
And it's the color range, exactly. So here, I can then pick the color at the bottom, and I can just add more colors to it. I can, of course, also play around with the fuzziness, but this one might select too much or not the stuff that I want. So I try to keep the fuzziness at a medium or at the lower end, and then we use the plus icon here to add more colors here. And this way, I should get a more accurate representation. Now, I have a much nicer mask than I had before, but I do have the issue that it also selected all the stuff up here. Do you know a quick way of just reducing it to this selection here and getting rid of the others?
Just command J, that one, because that is already on a separate layer. Is that the flame?
Sure, that would work, but just for practice, if this was not on its own layer yet, it would also copy up here. So how can I only keep this selection while deleting all the others? I use the marquee tool, because with the marquee tool, we not only have the option to add or subtract something, so we know I can hold down Shift and I can add the selection. I can hold down Alt and I can subtract a selection. But if I click and drag and I take a close look at it, let me see if I can get there. If I get a close look, Shift gives me, I have to do this before I start clicking and dragging. So holding down Shift gives me a plus, Alt gives me a minus, and Alt and Shift gives me an X, which means it will only keep what is inside of the selection and everything else will be deleted. So this way I can only focus on this selection here. So again, Command J, I can load the same selection from this layer that I have by holding down Command and clicking on the preview icon here. It loads the same selection. Then I can again grow the selection and fill this. So I go to Select, Modify, Expand, let's go for 10, and then Shift Delete, Content Aware. And this is good enough. So now I have these 3 layers that I can animate separately, move around, have them wiggle so it feels a little bit more like a flame. Okay, lastly, I would just get rid of the other flames by simply creating selections of them. I scroll to the layer and I hit delete. And then I can save this as a PSD. So let's do this together.
Well, my computer takes down those long, so.
So we start by opening up the 0013.
The one without the turban?
You can use the one with the turban if you want to.
Oh, of course we should also say we don't say la duban. You just grab that post.
Do we have it open? Good. Then the first thing is we want to duplicate and cut this out of the background. So we hit M for the marquee tool and we create a marquee selection of the flame. Which one you take doesn't really matter. I take the bottom left one. Then we hit Command Shift J, and this should give us a duplicated and cut layer. Alrighty, continue. We don't want to waste too much time in Photoshop. Next, we want to create a duplicate of the round part here. We don't care about a perfect mask because it will have some fuzzy edges, but they will fit perfectly to the background, so that should be fine. We hit W for the quick selection. If W shows you the magic wand tool, in this scenario it might also work, but I still prefer the quick selection. In that case, you want to hold on Shift W to switch between the magic wand and the quick selection. Then you click and drag over the circle in the center, and it should create a selection of the circle. We want to create a duplicate of this, so we hit Command J. And we should now have a new layer that only contains the white inside of the flame. Then we want to get the same selection backwards. The quickest way of doing that is holding down the Command key and clicking on the icon or the preview of the layer, not the name, on the preview of the layer. Command click loads the same selection that we had previously. We want to grow this selection, so we go to Select, Modify, and Expand. Because this image has a pretty large resolution, we want to expand it by 10 pixels, and hit OK. So we should now have a larger outline over here. Then we want to get rid of this circle from the layer below. So we take the circle layer and we hide it. Then we select the original flame, and we want to use oh my god, this icon of the thumb is not clean. Can you see how the background is looking through the finger? That is so unprofessional. Can we sue? Yeah, seriously, I've never noticed this.
Can you go over the gray?
Yeah, here, it's gray. And especially when we have a color, we can clearly see. But it's all over the place. It's not just the finger, it's also the other three ones.
Also, what's up with that thumb?
That doesn't happen with Infinity.
The thumb is
Probably not.
Let's try.
This is... That changes interactively the color of the background. Like every time, okay, now I'm orange, now I'm gray. Alrighty, so we want to select the original flame, and we want to use Shift Delete as the shortcut to open up the fill dialog. So Shift Delete. Then we choose for the contents to use the content aware, and the rest can stay the same. Maybe it works nicely if we use the color adaptation. And then we say OK.
It doesn't work for me.
Doesn't matter because we're not working on a transparent area.
Yeah, but I need the third one. I already have it. I already set the content aware.
Dude, what's that?
Next, we want to create a selection of the flame on the inside, and we notice the quick selection doesn't really give us the sharp edges that we want, but we have clear color differences between the two. So, with the layer selected, we will go to Select and use the color range. Here, you will use the first color picker, this one here, to pick a color that suits well. So I would take the color in the bottom here, so the yellowish color. In the preview, it should now look something like this.
For me, shrink just the... Who is it?
Alrighty, I want a little bit more focus. We spend way too much time on this. We use the color picker plus, and with this one we will pick a color that is a little bit higher up. And we should see that it now selected the entire thing here. It might have some small areas that it selected more, but we can always fix it later if we want to. Or we can also try using the color picker deselect to deselect the area down here. Yeah, and now I have a much cleaner selection. You can also play around with the fuzziness here, but of course, don't overdo it because then more things come in than we want to. All right, another way of using this is to show the mask already in large here, because this mask is pretty small. Sometimes it's hard to see what you're doing. For this, you can use the selection preview. And here we could set this, for instance, to grayscale. And then we can see the mask that we have. And I can see it did not select everything up here as I wanted it to. So we'll use the plus to add the color here, and another minus to deselect the color down here. Yeah, but I can see apparently they are too similar. So I really need to play around with the fuzziness a little bit to get a medium result. All right, then we hit OK, and we should have a selection here. Then, just like before, we hit Command J to duplicate this thing out. Then, we want to load a selection of the flame that we just cut out. Expand it again, so select, modify, expand, 10 pixels, select the bottom layer, or the bottom flame, and we use the content-aware fill again. Now, we should have the bottom layer, the flame, and the inside of the flame. Shift delete.
How many pixels to be expanded by?
10. It should have remembered the value from before.
And then we duplicate it after expanding.
Before expanding.
So after expanding, what do we
After the expansion, we want to delete the flame, the yellow one.
Why do we have? Why can't we just put the t-shirt, the dick on the t-shirt?
Why is this so hard?
Well, then there are many more possibilities, Breaker.
Alrighty. So now that I have this prepared, the last thing that we want to do is get rid of the other flames. So we hit M for the marquee selection, and we just make marquee selections of the other flames that we want to get rid of. We do this together.
Can I just delete them all if I already isolated one?
Just get rid of the other flames. How you do it, I don't care. So I make the marquee selections, I select the layer 1, and I hit the delete key, and then I hit Command D. So I should now be left with the bottom layer as the guy, and then I have 3 layers on top, which represent the 3 different colors of the flame. Are we good?
Yeah. It's just 'cause my content away fill didn't work. But it's fine. I'll just give it from someone else.
Just make sure that you have the 3 layers. I don't care about the content-aware fill. All right, so we save this as a PNG. Although, one thing that we might want to do as a PSD, it is a very, very large image. And After Effects doesn't like it when things are way too large. We are probably not going to zoom into this. So we might want to adjust the height of this to only have the height of our full HD composition, because we don't need much more. So we hit Command Alt I. I can't. So image size, and I can see that this is super, super large. So 8,000 pixels for the width is too much. After Effects will get super, super slow. So we do this together because it's very simple. Open up the image size option. It is under image and then image size. Make sure that you lock the ratio, and then I would say a height of 1,500 should be more than enough. What did I say? 1,500. Trick question. Could I also just change the resolution?
No.
Exactly, because it doesn't matter. When we work with pixels, the resolution don't mean shit. Then, my personal recommendation when it comes to the resampling is the bicubic smooth gradients. Because with any other mode, especially of the newer ones, like the preserved details 2.0 or bicubic sharper reduction, it just makes the image smaller, and then it puts a sharpen filter on it. But you will always see that it has put a sharpen filter on it. Especially when we do it with illustrations, it looks like crap, because you don't have clean, smooth edges anymore, but you feel the glowing of a sharpen filter on it. So generally speaking, I would say always use the bicubic smooth gradients. You can always sharpen it yourself later on. So you don't get a better result if you use any of these ones here for making it smaller. So bicubic smooth gradients, my personal recommendation. Then I hit OK, and then the image should be a lot smaller, and it will be a lot nicer for After Effects to handle. So now we can save this. I will just put it on the desktop as a PSD. All right. Next, I want this to be imported into After Effects. I will do the first steps first. Afterwards, we do it together. So I really want to focus on the flames and the animation of the flames first, and then we do the rest. So I import the PSD. When I do that, After Effects asks me how I want to import it. I want people to look here, so you don't get lost later on. So I should get this pop-up, which asks me if I want to import it as footage, composition, or composition retain layer sizes. In most cases, we want it to be composition retain layer sizes, and this is such a case. I then hit OK, and I get a composition as well as a folder with all the layers from the PSD file. When I open up this composition, I can see how it looks like this.
So then you should name your layers really nicely.
Well, I can always go in here and I could call this one inner. I can always rename them.
Oh, you can see it there easily. Okay.
Yeah, I can see here the original names from the Photoshop file, but of course I can always rename this as I want to. Remember, this does not change the Photoshop file, because After Effects just imports it and gets information from Photoshop, and it only cares about the image information, but not about the names that we see here.
So if I delete that image,
Then it will also be gone in After Effects.
no, if I delete that in After Effects, it's also going to be gone in the PSD.
No, the exact opposite.
If I delete it in PSD, it's going to be gone in After Effects.
Exactly. And nothing that I do with After Effects has any effect on the original Photoshop file. So After Effects is always completely non-destructive. It doesn't destroy anything. Okay, so now I have a little challenge. You might, or you know, all the steps. I want to get a composition, but I want the composition to only have this size here. It is a little bit complicated, because the issue is, when I select this one layer, so just this one here, I can pre-comp this, and I get this option to leave all attributes. When I leave all attributes, I will get a composition that has the exact same size that I want to. If I, however, select multiple layers, I right-click and I pre-compose, I don't get this option. It will move all attributes into the new composition, and I will get a composition that has the size of the main composition. But I want something in between. I want a composition that is just the size of this element here, but it should have all these layers in it perfectly aligned. Let me show you the first half of it to show you what the issue is. Because when I copy, if I pre-compose the first layer, because now I have a composition that I want, I could copy the other ones and I could paste them in here. But they don't show up. Or at least not where I expect them to. They are down here. Because After Effects knows, all right, it has a certain position. It has a position of 174 for the x-axis and 800.5 for the y-axis. And it will keep that exact position intact. But now, because the composition around it has changed, it has a different offset, and it's not aligned with the layer underneath it. But if you think really hard, you will know how we can fix this. a null object could actually work. But it's simpler.
Shift plus parent equal to
Ah, that is the exact function that we will use for this. However, I can't do it with these layers directly. See, when I do this, they will be aligned to the center of it, because they don't know how they are supposed to be placed. They just know I go to the parent. Hmm? No.
Can you say original to parent to original comp size location position?
No.
Okay, but I don't know. Sorry.
The trick is actually quite simple. I don't know why other people don't use it. I have showed it a couple of colleagues as well, and they were like, wow! I was like, I don't know what the problem is. So, I have this layer, and if I duplicate this layer, I could move it around, but whenever I do the shift parenting, it jumps exactly back to that position, because it has the same size, the same anchor point. So I will use the duplicate of this layer as the parent when I copy paste and do the parenting. So I duplicate the bottom layer. I select the bottom layer again. I pre-compose this. So we'll go to, I'm blind, pre-compose, and I call this one flame. And I leave all attributes, so I get a composition in the correct size. Then I need to parent the white and the orange, the white and the yellow, and I parent it to the duplicated orange. I select all three layers, I copy, and I paste them into the flame. Then I select the orange layer, and I do the shift parenting. And now everything aligns perfectly, and I can delete the duplicated layer. Make sense? All right. The nice thing about this is that I now have a completely separate composition that just works on its own. Next, I want these flames to wiggle around and do interesting things. I will go the simple route, which is not as pretty, which is using just I forgot how it's called, something displaced. I will start with the white part in the center, and I look for an effect that is called something displace. Not the displacement map, I want the turbulent displace. There we go. What the turbulent displace does is, it creates a noise, the noise that we already know from After Effects, so we have like turbulent, bulge, twist, and some others, and it uses that one to randomly displace my layer. Here, we also have an evolution, and as I change the evolution, I can see how the entire thing is just wiggling around. So what if I want this to wiggle around constantly? I use an expression. On the evolution. So I alt-click on the evolution, and what is the expression called? If the value constantly goes forward, it is constantly changing and wiggling around. So how do I create this motor? I take the current value and I multiply it by time. Remember, as time progresses, it will multiply the time with the current value that I have, and therefore have a constant continuous motion. So right now, nothing would happen if I play this back. Oh, it does happen because I already changed this value. So in here, I have 344. So as I play it back, it is doing 344 evolution degrees per second. I can then change the amount of the displacement, and I can also change the size of the displacement. So now I just have this little bit of a nice and natural wiggle going on. The same one I can then copy, and I can paste it onto the other layers as well. So this one, and when I now play back, I get this nice effect here. Now, all of them wiggle pretty much the same way, just in different sizes because the layers have different sizes, and this looks a little bit too synchronized for my taste. So when something is synchronized, what is probably the issue?
Should we use offset?
Remember in Cinema 4D, when we have something random, what do we always have?
Seed.
A seed. So this is also a random motion, so this one also has a seed. When it comes to expressions, an expression always by default has a seed based on the index number. So we can just apply the same expression to multiple layers and they will all behave completely different. When it comes to an effect that has something random in it, this is not the case because the seed is defined by the effect and that is always a fixed number. So here, my random seed is now set to 0 for one of the layers. If I want it to be different on the others, I go to the next one, open up the evolution, and I set this, for instance, to 1, and on the next one, I will set this one to 2. And now, all 3 layers have a completely different animation going on. If I want to change the speed of something, I can just select the layer, hit E twice to open up the properties that have expressions applied, and I can just increase this value. And now the center will wiggle quicker than the rest. All right, let's do this together. We start by importing the Photoshop file. When we import it, we should get a pop-up that asks us how we want to import it. The import kind should be composition, retain layer sizes. Since we don't have layer styles, this option down here doesn't matter which one we choose. Then we hit OK, and we should get a composition along with a folder with all 4 layers. We want to open up this composition by double-clicking it. Let's continue. Now maybe we rename these layers so it's a little bit easier for you to follow because we have a couple of duplicate layers and stuff. So the top layer, the white inner part, we want to rename it and let's call this one white. The yellow part we call yellow. And the orange part we call orange. And I will show you in a moment. And the background, let's call it character. So your layers should be called white, yellow, orange, and character, so that we are all on the same page. Just as a reminder, if you ever remove a file, I will still show it. If I move the file, then After Effects will tell me, oh no, it's gone. It will show me where it is, but it doesn't know where it's now. It will show me these weird errors here. I will also see an indication in the project panel whenever a layer is missing. Sometimes it doesn't update properly for certain layers. It will also be shown in italic. When a layer has these bars and it's written in italic, you can always double-click the layer. It will then open up the Replace dialog, Replace Footage file. Then I can't do it as simply as in Cinema 4D. I literally have to select the file that I want to use, and then I say Import again. It will then detect, I know where the other ones are, and it will update them. Sometimes, however, it is a fucking moron, and then it does not work. So some files might not be relinked the way that we want them to. Sometimes a simple reload here when we go to Purge and reload everything might help. If, however, it does not help, then we have to find that layer that did not work, which is the yellow, or the original name is the layer 4. And on layer 4, I would have to do it manually. Here, I can see After Effects got completely confused because Adobe sucks. I have to replace this manually now. I would right-click on the layer, and I will go to Replace Footage and File. And here I have to be a lot more specific than I was before. I have to choose the Photoshop file. I click on import. Then I have to tell it specifically which layer it is. I have to say choose layer, and it should be layer 4. And it should be layer size. I have to remember what it's supposed to be. It doesn't detect it automatically. So I have to really tell it what it should do. The best solution is, if this ever happens, to actually move the file back to where After Effects knows where it comes from. Or, no, that is the thing. Otherwise, as you can see, 4 layers apparently is already too hard for it to understand what's happening. Sometimes it works quite well and can have 500 layers and everything is found correctly, but here, just 4 layers and it got confused and things got fucked up. And then you really have to do it manually, which sucks. But now, I'm back where I was. Alrighty. By the way, here is also a great example to see what the difference between a layer name and a source name is. So we've renamed the files. So if I see my yellow layer is missing, I don't know which one it is up here, because down here I changed it to yellow. But when we click on layer name, it can show the source name. And there we can see what the actual name of the footage item is, how it was imported. So this is what this is for. Layer name gives us a name that we can choose in After Effects, and the source name will always be the original file name. Alrighty. Now, follow my steps very closely. We need a duplicate of the orange, so the parenting later on works. So we hit Command D on the orange. We should now have an orange 2. We don't want to use it right now, so we select the original orange again, and we use Command Shift C to open up the pre-comp options. You can also right-click and choose pre-compose at the bottom of the list.
With which one?
The orange. Then it's important that we choose the Leave All Attributes option. The name, let's call it Fire. Then we hit OK. Next, we want to get the parenting right. The white and the yellow need to be parented to the orange 2. So white and yellow, both parented to the layer 3, which is called orange 2. When we want to copy-paste it over to the fire composition, we need to select it in a certain order, because After Effects remembers the area that you select things. And when we cut and paste them, it might revert or randomize the order. Or not randomize, it will paste them in the order that we select them. So when we want to paste it in this order, you have to select it from the top, hold down Shift, and then select the orange 2.
What is the sign next to like the ghost thingy that is only there on the orange one?
This one, it's the asshole.
The what?
I shouldn't have asked.
I think I explained it last quarter. Some people call it the asshole, some people call it the sun or the star.
It's an asshole.
But it's, I mean, we work with penises today, so today it's definitely an asshole.
But what's the thing next to it? Is it really a guy with a big nose?
Yeah, this is a head with a big nose.
Who creates those?
Man, I wish that was my job to make those.
But you remember this one, right? We've used this quite recently.
Now he's gone.
He thinks he's really
Seriously, you forgot what this does?
No, it's
No, I remember, but I never saw it go down. I never paid attention.
Apparently.
No, I mean.
So this is a shy guy, and when he's shy, he hides behind the table.
don't judge.
Do you have something against big noses?
Yeah, what
Alrighty. So, I will talk about the asshole a little bit later. We will actually use it today.
The fire must go somewhere.
Alrighty. So, we select the layers from top to bottom, white to orange 2, and we hit Command X to cut these layers because we don't need them in this composition. Now we notice that the orange layer is still called orange and not fire, even though we called the pre-comp fire. The reason is, in here it is called fire, and this is the source name. But it remembered the layer name that we gave this layer. But when I change it to the source name, I can see that it's still called fire. If you want to rename this backwards, you can select the orange, hit enter, and just delete it. And hit enter again, and then it will revert back to the source name. And here is where you might also notice the brackets. Now this layer gets brackets because we are showing the layer name, and this indicates this layer doesn't have a layer name. So the brackets mean it's showing right now the source name. Okay? So all these things totally make sense, and for finding things, it can be super useful. So we renamed the orange layer to nothing, and it should now be fire in brackets. We then open up the fire composition by double-clicking it, and we just hit Command V to paste. Right now, depending on what we've done in the past, it might either show the source name or the layer name. To make things simpler for us, let's switch it and make sure that we see the source name. Sorry. Yeah. Now, the orange 2 sits somewhere at the bottom where we don't want it to. And the orange 2 should be aligned with the original orange, which now just only shows the original layer name. So we take the orange 2, we parent it to the bottom layer, but we hold down Shift as we do that. And it should now be perfectly aligned. Mm-hmm.
Is there some way to go back to select the...
You can always undo. All right, let's continue. Focus on me. Girls, focus on me. Now we have the orange 2, which we now have 2 times. We don't need that. So we select the orange 2 and we delete it. Then we can select the bottom layer, which originally was called orange, and we just call it orange again. Then we start from the top with the layer white, and we want to apply something with turbulence. So I type in turbure, and I can see there's a turbulent noise and a turbulent displace, and I want to use the turbulent displace. So on this effect, we should see how it displaces our thing, and when we increase the evolution, it should warp around funny. So far, so good? Alrighty. Now that we know that the evolution is the one that we need to animate, let's change it to something like 1 round or something like this. We don't have to be too exact. So the evolution should be 1 round and something. And we want to apply an expression to this. So we hold down the Alt key and we click on the stopwatch of the evolution. Then we type in the expression value asterisk time. Oui. Alrighty. Now, when we play this back, it should look something like this.
Do we just hit enter out or
No, click outside, because enter will go into a new line in the expression. So you always have to click outside.
doesn't matter if there's a new line to?
No. Alrighty. What we can also try is, right now it will be contained within its original boundary. We can see what happens if we let it loose. For this, we can go to the pinning and tell it that it should not be pinned. So right now, it is pinned to all, but we could say it should be pinned to none. If we now play this back, we can see how it moves around a lot more intensely, but it also moves to the borders, and we can see the borders of the layer. Fortunately, we do have an option to fix this, and that is directly underneath the pinning, and that says resize layer. So when we now play this back, it can now completely move around freely.
It's too much. It's too free. Like America.
Did you see Jane the Virgin?
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
But not the new stuff. Don't spoil it.
You watched Jane the Virgin?
It is so awesome.
But it is the best telenovela that is not really a telenovela.
It is really good.
No, have you watched it? No, have you continued?
How does it happen that you don't watch it? Anyways, but there was such a funny thing. They were.
Wait,
Don't spoil it.
yeah.
It's just a tiny thing. It has nothing to do with the story. It has nothing to do with the story. But they are in a place where they show a lot of American things. And you know sometimes how these people dream and then just stuff is animated and happens. And there were these portraits like winking at someone. And sooner or later, they got to a portrait of the president. But it was Trump. And then Trump morphed to Obama, and then Obama was the one winking. And I was like, that is so badass. Anyway, that show is worth it. It's funny. Alrighty. Now we realize that this is probably a little bit too free and too much, so we want to reduce this. We both want to reduce the amount and the size. Let's take a look at what happens when I change the size. So if I have a very small size, I can see that this already also reduces the amount. So usually first, play around with the size until you get the detail of distortion that you want. So maybe something like this, maybe 10 is a nice value. And maybe this already is a good amount of displacement. But of course, I can always increase this or decrease this to whatever. So I think an amount of 50 and a size of 10 is sufficient for this. Next, we want to have the same thing happen to the other layers as well. Because we've already done certain things, we can just copy the effect that we have. So we have our white layer selected, and in the Effects Controls panel, we choose the turbulent displace. And we hit Command C to copy it.
Just click it in Command C.
Just select the name so it's highlighted, hit Command C. Then, to have things a little bit more organized, we can close the layer 1, which is the white layer, so we see a little bit better. Then we select the yellow layer and we hit Command V to paste. It will then put all the effects that we've done onto that layer. There is another option that may look a little bit more like fire, where we can also control how much it displaces where. Right now it displaces all over the place, but usually it displaces more the more we go to the top.
Should be on the tip, more displacement, and on the
Exactly. But I don't think we have time for that right now. All right, then we do the same thing with the orange layer, and we can take a look at what it looks like right now. So I think maybe for the layers that are a little bit larger, I want to use a larger size, and I can do that because every single layer has a different effect on it.
But if we keep it larger size, it won't be it will be restricted to this layer. So,
It will, sorry, it will what?
if we make it a larger size, the orange, then won't it be restricted to this layer and again it will become a square? Because right now it's like our layer is exactly the same size as the orange. So if it doesn't have enough freedom to move out.
You mean that it will be cropped in here?
Yeah, it should come in there.
Hmm. And it is cropped in here. We will fix that later. But that is your question, right? Hmm? Yeah. For now we ignore it, but we'll fix it right in the next step. So now we can adjust the sizes of the different layers, and maybe that is already enough. If we have different sizes, they will already look different, and we don't have to change the seed. And we already have now a fire wiggling around. Alrighty. I want to show you just very, very briefly what the advanced version of this would have been, but it takes a little bit more time, so I will only do it on one layer just so you understand what the process is. Right now, on the turbulent displace, we only have one displacement that will be applied to the entire layer, but essentially we want it to be displaced more at the tip and less at the bottom, right? For this, I will just take the larger layer here and I create a new composition, and I just do it with this one. I create a new composition, a new layer, which has the exact same size as the layer below, and I will put on a turbulent noise effect. This one I will scale down a little bit, maybe like 50%, that should be enough, and I increase the contrast a little bit. Then I create another layer, make it comp size, and I put a ramp onto it. Now this one needs to be, pretty much the way it is. I create yet another layer, I make it comp size, and I make this one 50% gray. Then the 50% gray uses the ramp as a mask, and it will use it as a luma matte. So now at the bottom it is gray, because the effect that I want to use is the displacement map. And we know something is white, it will be displaced in one direction. If it's black, it will be displaced into the other. If it's gray, it doesn't get displaced at all. So this way I can create a map and use this one as a map for this layer. So I will go to the displacement map, I will choose the map as my layer, and if I now displace it here, you can see how it displaces it at the top a lot more than it does in the bottom. Now apparently this has way too much detail on it, so we'll go to my noise here and I decrease the complexity to something like 2. Alright, getting there. And then I will use the same thing that I did earlier on the evolution, which is a value by time. And I will choose maybe a value that is a little bit higher, like 2. And when I now play this back, I have a fire that behaves a little bit stronger in the top, but the bottom stays more calm. And then of course I play around with the size and the intensity of the noise and the displacement effect. But because this always has a specific size, we would need to do this for every layer that we have, and that just takes a little bit more time. So for today, we stick to the simple version. Okay, so I don't need the map and I don't need this layer anymore. Over here, we now have the issue that in certain times, we can see how the layer crops at the bottom. And this is where we'll use the asshole. So, we've used it in the past, but for something entirely different. When we have a vector layer, then the sun will make it continuously rasterize. Do you remember? So we know, for instance, that this is already by default enabled when we have a text layer. So when I create some text, I can see that the text has this icon by default enabled. This means when I scale the text up, I can scale it how much I want, and it will always be sharp at 100%. Of course, it looks pixelated as soon as we go further than 100%, but that's true for every layer, because in After Effects, everything in the end is based on pixels. If I have a vector layer, I can enable this option. On a composition, this has a different effect. When we hover over this icon, it shows us the definition. For comp layer, collapse transformations. For vector layer, continuously rasterize. So what does this collapse transformations mean? It means that it essentially ignores the composition, and it just shows the layers as if the layers were inside of that composition.
So it's like merge, but not.
Pretty much. It's kind of like as if we have a smart object, but we can enable it to still have the layers in the original file without having to go into this smart object? Well, we still need to go into the smart object, so this is not like a folder then. But if I enable this, I can see that this does not crop here anymore. It also has multiple purposes. So right now we can see apparently the boundary of the layer or the boundary of the composition is ignored, so all the layers are seen in full. But this also works, for instance, when we have 3D layers. So let's pretend, and let me zoom out. Let's pretend I've placed them in 3D space. So I open this up, and I take the white, I make all of this 3D, I take the white and I move it a lot closer to the camera. And I take the yellow and I also move it a little bit closer to the camera. So if I would parent the top things to the bottom, which they are, I could rotate this around and I can see that they are now layered on top of each other, right?
How do you specify the distance between them?
I just move them around on the z-axis.
Okay.
However, if I go back in here, I can see, well, stuff is cropped, and when I make this layer 3D and I rotate it around, this does not work. This does not give me the result at all that I wanted, because it's merged. A composition always merges what it sees. So even when I move this around in 3D space, like this, this is now just a 2D version of this that then gets moved around, unless I use the asshole. So if I enable this, I can immediately see the boundaries of all the 3 layers that are inside it, and now my composition has a boundary that is in 3D space. So now with this composition, I can define from where I want to look at these layers.
Wow, that's impressive.
So this is what this thing does. Another advantage of this is it also lets through adjustments. This is something I will show you in Photoshop first, because this is something a lot of people don't understand. Let's say I have these things here in a group. If I now apply an adjustment layer, for instance some curves, because I want to make this overall more orange, let's say. I will go to my blue channel and I take out blue from the highlights. Now I take out the orange from the highlights, right? But it is now applied to everything. One option to fix this would be, I could only put this onto one layer. I could use a clipping mask, right? I can use a clipping mask by now in the newer versions of Photoshop to a group or to a single layer. But what many people don't know is, or don't notice, this layer has now a special blending mode. A group, by default, is set to pass through. This means all the adjustments that we do inside of this group are passed through the group. What I could do, however, I could switch this, and I could call this one to just be a normal blending mode.
So it just blends the first one in the layer, or?
And now, this adjustment layer is only applied to all the things in my group. Let me just make it overall a little bit different, like this. So I don't have to use special clipping masks. I don't have to move this outside of the group and work with the clipping mask here. I can just keep it inside of the group and will be automatically applied to everything below. So this is super, super useful, and this is also exactly how After Effects works. Because if let me just get rid of the 3D stuff that I've done. So I go here, let me reset this, and I don't make them 3D anymore. If I apply an adjustment layer, the adjustment layer always has the size of the composition. So I could add, for instance, a fast box blur, just for fun. I repeat the edge pixels and I blur this out. I go back here, I can see how this is blurring out the layer, but it is only blurring this layer. So if I take the fire and I move it over here, it will be its own thing on top. But if I enable this, it's like telling the group that it's passed through, so the adjustment layers will also affect stuff that are inside, that are behind it. So now I can see it's also blurring everything here. So this, for instance, could also be used for special design. So I could say that I have a new composition. Let's just make it the default size that we usually have. I could give it an adjustment layer. I could put here a fast box blur on it. I don't quite know what it does, so I just increase it by something. Then I can create a white layer that I set to 50%, and then I have some text that I place on top. So something like this. I can then place this as an info box over here, and I can see right now it doesn't look like it's doing much, but if I enable the sun icon, the adjustment layer comes through. And then everything that is behind it gets blurred. Make sense? Awesome. So in our example, it is just a very, very tiny change where we just want to make sure that even that parts of a layer that go beyond the boundary are still visible, but this asshole can do a lot more. Why some people also refer to it as an asshole, not just because it looks like it, but it makes things harder to understand. So for instance, if I have this layer here, and on this one where I have the sun icon applied, I put on a fast box blur, and I set this one to 10 pixels. I can duplicate the layer, I can move it to the side, and for this one, I disable this. For now, they look the same, but if I make this one larger, it looks like I just make it larger. It is the exact same layer. Nothing is happening. On this one, however, with the sun icon enabled, the blur remains the same. For each scale, it will be re-rasterized in the new size, and then on that new size, the scale will be applied, the blur will be applied. Here, it is applied at 100%, and therefore scales along with everything. Here, for every scale that I do, for every change that I do, it will move along, and it will be reapplied once the layer is placed. And this can result in very unexpected results, because you would not expect that this happens. Also, some other effects behave unexpectedly when layers move around or they change the scale. And that's why this option should always be used with care and very specifically when you know what you need. Alrighty, so we apply, let me just undo these couple of steps here. We just go back one composition, we don't need this, from the file we go back to the 0013 and we enable the sun icon, and now we should not have that issue with the transparent areas. We could then duplicate the layer and we can place it onto the different hands. If we want this to feel a little bit more random, of course we can flip them around, and we can also change the times of the flames, and therefore every flame will just behave a little bit differently than the other. It's just a small difference, but still. Alrighty. Do you want to do a short break or do you want to finish earlier? Yeah, let's vote. All in favor for doing a break?
Can we just take like 5 minutes?
No, because they will end up being 10 minutes anyways.
And let's just take a break because.
Yeah? Okay. Then we take a short break. And then we continue.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So, I will do the first steps first. Afterwards, we do them together. So, I have... Now, where is it? I have the penis. And I will import it into my After Effects project. I simply drag it in here. Then I want to have a separate composition. Maybe I'll call this one _main. This will be my main composition, obviously. I hit or high. Into here, I will drop the penis. Because the penis is black, I need a white background. I could also make the penis white, but I will keep the penis as is. Then I will want the penis to be a little bit bigger. Oh, look how easy that is. Now I'm not quite sure how well this will look. I will just try it. Maybe we will not do it. I want it to bulge, like we did it with the eyes in the Instagram example last class. And it should move along the penis, so it feels like the thing is going through the shaft as it goes out.
I was thinking.
So, there is an effect that does exactly this, and it's called bulge. So the bulge gives me this.
Yes. That's some proper ejaculation right there. What?
This is so good.
The bulge.
The bulge, yes. So, the first thing that I will do, just to keep things simple for me, by default, the bulge has a different radius for the width and the height, which I think is a little bit unfortunate. I want just one value that I can change. So how can I connect them together so that they always do the same thing? I parent them via... No. Expression. Exactly. So I double click on the vertical radius, and we can see that every property has also its own pick whip. And with this pick whip, I can pick whip the vertical radius and drop it to the horizontal radius. Now I can see an expression is applied, and the expression just says, look at the effect called bulge, and then to the horizontal radius and do the same thing. So now I only have one property that I can change, which makes it a lot easier for me to adjust and animate the size. Now I have this issue that I feel like the edges are not smooth enough. When I deselect the bulge, I feel like I see where it ends. It's not a smooth transition as I would want it to be. But if I select the bulge to change settings, I can always see the boundary, and that is annoying. We can turn off the boundary by holding down Command-Shift-H, because this way I can still have the bulge selected, but I don't see any boundaries, so it makes it a lot easier for me to edit. And here, I think it's the taper radius that I want to change. As you can see, if it's 0, I get the super hard edge, but if I make this a little bit stronger, it is a smoother transition. Now I have to hit Command-Shift-H again in order to move this around, and I can see that this will probably work a little bit better. So maybe it starts somewhere back here and is a little bit smaller, so we don't really see that it's there, and it will grow as it comes out. First the Cinema 4D session with Jack, and now this one. Let's see what happens on Thursday. So, I animate the horizontal radius and I animate the bulge center. Then I will go forward a little bit. Let's say, just for now, 20 frames forward. I will move it first to the tip so I can see how large I want this to be towards the end. Maybe something like this. Yeah. And it should be probably all the way out. So when I now scrub through, maybe it should grow a little bit quicker. So I will take the horizontal radius and I'd get it a little bit closer so it grows quite quickly, and then it can move through and then jump out. So when we play this back, it does this. Yeah, there's this tiny bit of an extra thing towards the end, but maybe this could be a style element that we use later.
I will put this in my controller.
I wouldn't. Alrighty. So, now we have this bulge thing. Now we want the fire thing to come out. So we can just take our fire composition that we have in here, put it in here, and it needs to shoot out. Now I have two challenges with this. We need a mask. Very good. And I want this to always follow along the path that it's moving. So we'll move around, it will shoot out, and then it will move around and then find its rightful place.
Should be tilted.
Huh?
It should be tilted.
Exactly. So it needs to change the rotation, but it also needs to change the rotation based on the motion. So as it moves around, it should be kind of like a comet.
Yeah.
How do we do this? Exactly. So for now, I will not change the rotation, I keep it as is, but I think I will move the anchor point to kind of like the center down here. Then I will first animate the position where it should move. So it starts here, I hit P for the position, then I will go forward. How much forward doesn't matter, because what I will use is the same technique that we used last quarter to animate the map. Remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember what the thing was that we used? Now, how do we create a path with multiple keyframes, but the keyframes adjust automatically over time? Almost. Rove across time, exactly. So I don't care where my keyframes are. I just go forward and I say, okay, so it shoots out, then it's maybe here, then a little bit later, it is up there. Maybe the first one makes a nice curve down here, and then it somehow lands there. I can always adjust these things later on. So now I want this path here to be time independent. So I select all the keyframes in the middle, I right click, and I say rove across time. Now I can move this around, and this defines the length of the animation, but it will always be a constant motion right now. So it shoots out and then goes there and lands. And of course, I can give this a little bit of an easing. So maybe on the last keyframe, I add the easing of 50 and 50, so we'll shoot out quite quickly, but then it gets slower towards the end. Lastly, I want this to follow along with the motion that it does. So I right-click on the fire, I go to Transform, and I choose the Auto Orient option. Here I will say Orient Along Path. And now as I play back, I can see what it does. So it moves along the path, just not quite the way that I want it to. So I hit R for the rotation, and I can see that it doesn't actually change the rotation.
Can you say bottom first?
Hmm?
Can you say bottom first?
No. But since this rotation is not touched, I can touch it and just rotate it the way I want it to.
So then you have to do keyframes for the
No.
rotation, right?
See, now it's following along
So
automatically.
basically bottom first.
Basically bottom first. But by just changing the rotation. All right. Now here, depending on how the last keyframe is set, it will move into a specific place. So maybe I want to touch that keyframe and just change the tangent to really make sure that it comes in straight from above, so it has the correct orientation towards the end. Then of course I want this whole thing to be synchronized with the bulge animation. So the bulge animation happens. Maybe I need to make it a little bit quicker. So first I see if this, yeah, this is good.
Smaller, shouldn't it? Like,
Yeah.
That would hurt.
But a smaller fire wouldn't hurt, right? I mean, that you can just shoot out, no issue.
Well, of course, it's still be hot.
Alrighty. So here now it can shoot out. This feels so wrong.
Now it feels wrong.
It felt wrong for a long time, but now it feels really, it's like there. All right. So now I want to mask this out. I want to make sure that it's not visible in this area here at the beginning. So what do I do?
Use flat back.
The what?
I have no idea. I tried to remember.
Use flat back.
Alpha stencils.
What I would do actually, because it's a little bit quicker, I would see if I could prepare this file already a little bit better in Photoshop. Because it might be a little bit hard to get what is annoying to get the mask the way that I need it to. And it might be a little bit easier for me to just with Photoshop fill in these transparent areas with white, because that's essentially all that I need. Of course, I could start creating a path around here, but I think doing that with Photoshop will be a little bit quicker. So, let's do that part of the Photoshop thing already together, because we're so well with Photoshop. No, that's not how I want it.
I have to close the
So-
program because my computer.
So we together open up Photoshop and we need to fill these insides here with white. What would be the best way of doing that?
Are we doing this together?
We are doing this together. But first, my question, how could we fill these insides here with white?
Click on it and then invert the selection and
Select the outside.
Done.
You select the outside and then it comes back.
Mhm. Well, command clicking selects everything around, but I kind of only need the inside to be selected. Command Shift I,
then you fill it.
but then I also fill this outside here.
Yeah, then you can select the outside with the one.
Hmm.
Why don't you select the outside and then?
There will be one way. Another way is both the wand and the other one, as you can see here, detect transparency. So I can pick my transparency here. I can then grow the boundaries. So select, modify, expand, just a little like 3, looks about right. This one I then invert, create a new layer, fill it with my color and drag this one to the bottom.
Can you please do that like 20 times slower?
You will use the magic wand tool on the left.
Okay, which one?
The shortcut for that is W. Or Shift W to switch it.
That reminds me of something.
It is one of the best scenes.
So now you invert it.
Then you select the outside. You want to invert the selection by hitting Command Shift I. And in this case, I now need to shrink it. So before I expanded it, now if I do it this way, I have to shrink it. So I go to Select, Modify, and then Contract. And I would contract it by 3 pixels. Maybe 2 pixels is already enough.
Now you just hit.
Then you create a new layer, Command Shift N. Then you make sure that you have the default colors. So you hit D for the default black and white colors. And then you can fill the selection on the selected layer with the background color by holding down Command and Delete. And then we can move this layer to the background.
Smart shortcuts. Command delete.
When I was younger and I was starting with Photoshop, I literally just sat there for hours hitting keys.
Well,
That's what I
was
did.
When you were younger, when you were like 3?
Oh. That's so sweet.
Let me show you. Okay, so first we delete that. Then we take the magic wand tool. Then we select here. Okay. Invert.
All right. Then we can either say we overwrite the PNG, although I don't really like overwriting things. So I will save this as a PSD. Later on, we will then use that one to import. Since I've already imported one, and I don't want to do things again like placing this and applying the bulge, I will just replace the layer. So even though this is a PNG, I can right-click on it, go to Replace Footage, File, this is just me doing, and I can choose the PSD as footage, merge layers, and now it's done. So when I now turn on my background again, and I animate this through, and have the fire behind it, I can see how it's now going outside it, like this. So I know at this point here, the bulge should be done. So I go to the bulge, and I will adjust my keyframes so that they are finished here, and this one obviously also needs to be a lot quicker. So now we get the feeling of it, of something coming out, and then yes, okay. Now, we need to place it in certain areas, and to figure out what they are, we will take I will take the O3 composition, I will place it here, and I will give it a specific size that I want this to have in the end. Maybe we need to make the penis a little bit smaller, otherwise it doesn't match too much. Yeah, but this is essentially it. The end position then of my first fire then should be exactly where the other one was, and we can animate the scale as well. And then we can just have it shoot out 4 different ones and get into places. Alrighty, let's do this together. We start by importing the penis. We use the PSD and we drag it into our project panel. This time, even though it's a PSD, we don't care about the different layers. So as import kind, we would choose footage.
And then merge layers.
And then merge layers. And we hit OK. Now, we need this to be inside of another composition. Then, that composition should have our default settings, so HDTV 1080-25. Since we will have more things later on, maybe we give it a little bit longer. Maybe let's give it 30 seconds. So as the duration, I would recommend using 30 seconds. Later on, we might elongate it if necessary. No, we keep it black because I rather want to use an actual color.
What about the black penis?
I want to use an actual color. The background of the composition stays the default black, and we add a solid for the background.
What did you change the duration to?
30. Like this. Alrighty. Then we want this to have a white background, so we hit Command Y, make it comp size, and choose a white color. Then we can drag the penis into the composition. I think it can stay quite small because of the rest that we have later.
Why is my penis so skinny?
We all have one different.
How am I supposed to ask that?
Are we good?
Yes.
Good. Okay, let's animate the bulge first. So, with our penis selected, we will hit Control Tab and we look for bulge.
Bulge.
It's okay.
Bulge. B-O.
EU.
I just asked kind of.
Ooh, look at that.
Did you get it?
Yes, yes, it's awesome.
Alrighty. Now we want to make sure that the vertical radius always does the same thing as the horizontal one. So we double click on the vertical radius and it opens up at the bottom. Then we alt click on the vertical radius, we don't, easier. when we look at the vertical radius and we look to the right, we can see that it has a pick whip. And we take the pick whip and we pick the horizontal radius. So the vertical radius should now have an expression that tells it, when we open it up, that tells it to look at the horizontal radius. So when we change the horizontal radius, the vertical radius should change along with it. It doesn't update the value down here live, but as we change it, we should see how it changes everything.
I feel so immature.
Mine, I don't get that circle.
And your ball is small.
You only get it when you have the effect selected. Or maybe you've already hidden it. Try hitting Command-Shift-H.
Ah, there it is. Thank you.
All right. Now we want it to be a little bit smoother towards the edges. So we increase the taper radius. Just a little bit, not too much. Just a little bit. Like 33. Then we should have a smoother transition.
Taper radius.
I can't do anything, my computer's frozen.
Taper radius.
Yeah, the dick's just too strong.
What does it take for the radius to replace any?
I'm too bad for it.
It's doing this. No, it's not the size. It's a transition. Let me show you. When we have... it doesn't matter. If I have a layer like this, and I put the bulge on it, and I increase the radius by a lot, we can see what it does. And we can see that it has... Let me zoom in. There we go. That it has a strong beginning here. But if we increase the taper radius, it smoothes that beginning out. So we have a transition instead of a sharp edge. So here we have a sharp edge where we can clearly see where it begins. But when we increase the taper, then we have a smoother transition. And that's what I'm looking for. So the bulge is actually quite an interesting effect and can be used for other things as well. This is trippy. Anyway, so here we want the horizontal radius at the beginning to be a little bit smaller, so small that it has no effect on anything. So maybe like 10. And we place it down here. At the beginning of the timeline, we want the horizontal radius to be keyframed and the bulge center. Then let's go 10 frames forward. 10 frames forward, we want the bulge to be at the end of the tip and the horizontal radius to be a lot larger, maybe like 45. Because if it's so small, we wouldn't see anything happening. So it needs to be larger. All right, let's zoom into the timeline so we can see our keyframes a little bit better. So we use this icon here to zoom into the timeline. Then we know that the bulge radius or the horizontal radius needs to be a lot quicker, so we drag these keyframes to the left. So the position goes from 0 to 10 frames, the position, and the horizontal radius is a lot shorter. So when we now play it back, we should see how the bulge grows quite quickly, then it reaches the largest radius, and then it goes through and outside.
Which goes faster? The bulge is 10 and the other one's smaller.
The horizontal radius should be shorter in the animation, and the bulge center should be longer. Something like this. So far, so good? Alrighty. Next, we want to get the flame in here. So we go back to our project panel, and we choose the fire composition.
And can we close the
Alrighty, let's continue. So we take our fire composition and we drop it into our comp 1. Then obviously we want the fire to be a little bit smaller, so we scale it down until it could be covered by the penis. So maybe like 22% or so should work fine. Then I already want to know to which place this should be animated. So before we animate it, we drag in our 0013 composition just so we know where everything is supposed to sit later on. So we take the 0013 and we drag it below the penis and we make it smaller, something like this. So we will use this one just as a reference. Maybe, so that we don't get irritated, let's make this one a little bit transparent, just so that we know that this is only supposed to be a reference for us. Then we select the fire, and we know that we want to animate the position. So we hit P. At the beginning of the timeline, we activate the stopwatch. From now on, it doesn't matter how much further we go in the timeline. So you can use shortcuts, you can use the slider, and just move forward in time and move the flame. So obviously, it should go outside of the penis. Then we go forward in time, and we just let it fly around. We can always adjust the curvature later on. So I'm not too worried about the curve right now. Just roughly the amount.
How many frames do we have to animate?
As I said, it doesn't matter.
What is it again? Transform, right? No.
Transform what?
To move the thing along the line.
We are not there yet.
Position. Position.
Yeah, we use positions.
Right now we are just animating the position.
But and the scale, right?
That is something we will add later on.
Okay.
So many questions.
Well, leave me alone.
Well, it's good that you ask questions. This is a very important topic.
That we're gonna use in the future.
Is there a reason why I'm not getting
Did we scale the
higher up?
Not yet.
Is there a reason why I'm not getting the lines when I edit the position?
Yeah, because we don't change the keyframes, we don't change the keys.
Next, we want to make the center keyframes rove across. So I have 3 of them. Don't select the first or the last keyframe. Select all the keyframes that are in between. That sounds like a magic riddle. No, it's just me. Okay. We right-click on those selected keyframes and we turn them into rove across time keyframes. They should now turn into tiny little dots. These tiny little dots will now adjust in time automatically. So we can now take the last keyframe and we can move it and we can see how the tiny little dots are adjusting automatically.
Can we also move the...
How many seconds are we showing? No, but we need to set some.
We will see. Let's put some easing on it and then see what length makes sense to us. We select the last keyframe, and that is the one that we want to ease. We can use the any.green and just give it the default easing of 50. When we then play it back, we can see that 1 second is very, very quickly, maybe a little bit too quick. So let's just try a different distance. Maybe I'll try 2 seconds.
Yes, I got it. Thank you. Sorry.
Are you being thankful or
very thankful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's just.
Yeah, and
One of his hands. One of your hands? His hands, the character. It's unknown.
Yes.
Who's jungling ejaculated fire.
It just shows he can handle a lot of things.
I'm sure he's able to handle a lot of things. Who said a fire?
are we good?
The character right there. I just
Good.
have two hands, man. This one has four.
Alrighty. Next, we want the fire to always move along the path. So we right click on the fire, then we go to transform, and we choose auto orient. And we choose the orient along path option. Right click on the fire, transform, and auto orient.
Is it orange along path?
Yes.
I have to read the words.
Yeah, but you stopped late, that's your problem.
No, I didn't work.
Wait 30 seconds and then you start. That's the name.
So far, so good. Next, we need to rotate it because apparently it moves sideways. So we hit R for the rotation and adjust the rotation until it feels like it's following along the path. So probably negative 90 degrees. And then it should move in the correct rotation.
Why can't I click this?
Next, we want to animate the scale so that it fits to the scale that we want in the end. Let's hit S for the scale and go to the beginning of the timeline. Here, we activate the stopwatch. Then, we hit U to reveal the other keyframes that we have. We move the slider to the end of the position, and we scale it up until it has roughly the size that we want it to have.
Yeah, use arm.
Also here, we can ease the last keyframe that we have.
No. Can I just?
Hmm?
No, figure it out. It's okay. My rotation still doesn't work.
God flies all the way. Wait.
So our class is already over. So your homework is the following.
Big four more and put them in the hands, right?
Yes.
Wait, what? Wait, what?
We want this thing to happen 4 times. So there should be 4 fires shooting out. There should be 4 bulges shooting out. So for the bulges, you have to get creative how you do it. You can either use multiple bulge effects, or when you're smart with the keyframes, you can use the same bulge effect.
Can we just make him shoot like a huge ejaculation and then it spreads into 4?
Kind of shooting after it.
This is no creativity.
Well, that's fine too. All right, so I want in the end to have all the 4 things there. Then the penis should fly away towards the top right corner, and the character should come in from the bottom. Let's see what the next one is. Afterwards, we have Nutella.
But then the top hand. I know what's gonna happen.
The character
It's
shoots
like you go away and the Nutella comes on the hand.
Exactly. The burning
And then
like
pop up.
Yeah. It goes
Yes.
and then it's.
Actually,
Yeah, it's actually burning Nutella
Or the
glasses.
dick comes back and then there's
And dips his dick into
I
the
don't
want to know.
Right?
and then it had the
Ich will nichts mehr wissen. Bitte lass es jetzt sein.
Hmm.
Wait, what's the one?
Well,
Are you setting up
how you do the transition is up to you.
We put this
You have to put the Nutella in somehow. But how you do it?
Fire just fade away like it's burning, like, and then the Nutella appears. Just do it.
Or you can do something with his hair.
This is up to you.
And then he throws together his hands, Nutella comes together, there's a big explosion, and the next picture appears.
Sure.
Is this up to you? Can we go crazy?
You can go completely crazy. So again, the homework is listen 4 more times or 4 times the fire, then the penis should fly away, the character should come in from the bottom, and then you have to figure out some sort of animation that is not too lame,
Really?
where the Nutella comes in at the end.
Just like from the top, like.
No, it's like the dissolve in PowerPoint. It's like
Without easing it
what if you do a slideshow?
and it's flat on his head.
Well, it could fall on his head and then push him down, so that would be fine too.
And what if the glass breaks and then suffers?
Yeah, sure, do that.
Yeah.
Sure, do that. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, sure.
Alrighty, task is clear? Awesome. Then, have a nice weekend. See you on Thursday.